All right. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the Istio Networking Working Group meeting. We have two things to discuss in the agenda. The first one is about the filter chain migration. This is an important change that has been merged into 1.3. And Yuchen will explain the details and also cover whatever we need to be aware of, especially for production environments. And hopefully we don't need more than 30 minutes for this. And then we can discuss about some limitations around TCP services. There is a GitHub issue with many comments, so I hope people got the chance to read the comments and can bring some perspective to this one. Yuchen, are you here with us already?
Go ahead.
Could you please?
Yeah.
I will stop sharing.
Start sharing. Should I present? Should I present my screen?
Yeah, that would be great. So you can scroll as you explain.
Give me one moment.
It takes a bit to load.
Yeah, everyone. I'm going to address this the works I did and delivered in 1.3. Basically, is the thing we did is that we for the virtual inbound listener, we add a new Kubernetes annotation so that we can separate inbound and outbound virtual listener. And for the virtual inbound listener, it doesn't share any sub listeners with the outbound. So the virtual inbound listener will be using a filter chain to match all the inbound traffic. And to support that, we also need the IP tables rule to identify the inbound traffic and outbound traffic. And this is by default turned on in 1.3. And the goal of this is to support the Envoy changes that there are Envoys deprecating bind to port the configuration so that you still can no longer use the shape of virtual listener at 15001 port and sub listeners to match the inbound traffic and outbound. So this is supposed to a mechanical change that we just aggregate all the non-listeners and transform the listeners to the filter chain and bind and insert to the virtual inbound listener. However, we are seeing kind of stuff during this change. So this is first is trampoline prevention. We did this. We no longer encounter this trampoline because we isolate the inbound and outbound. So previous we had the risk that the inbound traffic is intercepted by the virtual listener, and then try to match the inbound small IP port listeners, and then we fail to find, and it go out through an outbound listener, and that traffic is pretend to be the one sent by the app, which controlled by this container. And the other things include infinite loop that you cannot send it. If the application happen to be a client of the if the application in the container happen to be a client and the server at the same time, you probably see a traffic going through the IP table routes again and again and never reach any server. And this filter chain and the splicing provide a mechanism to bypass that without breaking the telemetry. And also with the filter chain, we can provide a default chain for any traffic. So it supports the better default networking, which is presented before by Louis. So that is one supporting part of that high-level goal. And as this is landed, we no longer need container port to declare which port is this part, which port are intercepted by IP tables. Container port is introduced to prevent the trampoline in the IP tables way. Now we have the filter chain where the IP tables just need to say capture all the traffic, and if it is non-port, pilot will send the list, will sign the filter chains and the configs. If it is non-port, it is captured by a pre-designed filter chain, and if the port is unknown, we will send as if there's no IP tables rule, and so that we no longer need the container port to determine which port we are going to intercept. Well, I know there are exceptions or user want to define. Definitely, we don't want the IP tables to capture my traffic. We have another annotation to support that for this particular ports, IP tables won't intercept. It acts as if the traffic would go directly into the container.
If I can put a small comment here. So I want to make sure everyone understands that in 1.3, all the traffic will be captured. That's a major change. So everything that goes in will be captured by Envoy, and it will go to Envoy like we had in the original Istio and 01, 02, and so forth.
So I have a question. Is this exclude ports already implemented? So let's say if I have a port that's on health check, I can annotate with exclude ports because I don't want Envoy to capture?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
absolutely.
By better default, we are saying if you don't want any explicit configuration, you are you act as if there's no capture.
Yeah, we had this feature from 0.3 or 4. Exclude ports, I mean.
Yeah, and it works well with this feature.
Okay, thank you.
So I need to warn that the default train or the default capturing traffic, we can only have one rule, so that it's not well defined how the traffic or how we should pretend the traffic to be not intercepted. Currently, it's just pass through and with the protocol sniffer, so that we defined two chains. For the default traffic, we allow a user to identify HTTP traffic and TCP traffic, but currently there's no particular filters added.
In other words, we do not have permissive, or I mean, it's passed through just like before. Just before the change, I mean, in 1.2, traffic to a port that is not in container port was just going directly to the destination. In the new implementation, it's still going to the destination, but we get telemetry and we can apply our buffers.
How does it interact with exclude outbound IP ranges and include outbound IP ranges? Actually, this is just inbound.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
inbound.
Okay, all right.
And for inbound, it's exactly, if you specify explicit exclude, they are respected. If you're specifying include, we switch back to the include mode, include by default, and everything is excluded. So it's basically we ignore the ports at IP table level.
Okay.
So Yuchen, we have a few references in documents to this like single port for the capture. Do you plan to update some of the docs on Istio.io site?
Istio.io document. What's that? I'm aware of that. The container port definition is deleted.
Yeah, Movin deleted that out of the pods and services requirement page, I think just 2 days ago. So that requirement is gone. But I just did a search, Google search on exclude ports on Istio.io. It didn't really return any obvious one. So I don't know if that's documented.
Excluded port. We still support excluded port.
Yeah, I was just saying I couldn't find any docs, at least not obvious to me, how to find the docs through Google searches on our website.
I think the troubleshooting page talks a bit about that.
Lynn, if the container port was removed from from the doc, probably we need to add it back, because we still support. I mean, if the user chooses to turn back the behavior to capture explicitly ports in IP table by changing the default capture mode, then the user will still be required to use container ports. We haven't removed the feature of supporting opt-in.
Oh, that's a good point. Well, the problem is if you look at that page, it's structured as these are the required things for you to do. And given this is enabled by default, we'll have to structure it as,
exactly,
you know, as a side note instead of like the mainstream.
Agree, but we cannot just remove it. That's my point. We need to be clear that if by default you don't need to, but if you choose to use annotation, you need it.
Yeah. You mean if you change your default configuration to not having this annotation by default, then you would need to, right?
Yes.
And there's also performance advantage, I believe, if you actually declare that container port ahead of time. No?
I don't think so.
For the default, for the traffic that bypass IP tables.
Right, exactly. If I already tell you the port, don't that save you to kind of figure out the port number a little bit?
Unfortunately not.
Well, from IP tables, we shouldn't get any benefit. The drawback is for the default traffic reaching Envoy.
I don't think there is any performance implication.
Well, if there's nothing, then why would we ever even want to allow user to go back unless this function doesn't work? That's the only reason.
Exactly
Okay.
why. And we need to be very clear in the documentation in case there are any problems how they can turn off the feature, because it's all features must have a turn off flag the first time they're released.
Right. So the only thing is if it's broken. Okay.
Well, I think that in addition to that, right, if they believe that they have a need to directly reach the application and they really don't even want the TCP proxy functionality of Envoy, then I think it's a legitimate use case, and we don't know why they would want it. I mean, something to do with performance, but yeah, I think
that's absolutely clear.
I have a question. So it seems that this feature will manipulate with the IP tables, right? Meaning that basically the container or the pod needs some privileged container, and it seems that it would break the CNI, Istio CNI, because the IP tables programming is done by Istio CNI. And it assumes that the application will not have any privileged container to manipulate the IP tables.
We are not manipulating the IP tables. We are just using CNI exactly certain options that we already had.
Yeah, it's just the init containers running. We're not at runtime. We're not making any changes to the IP tables.
Yeah,
but there is a change now, because right now that like before the traffic used to be sent to a single port. Now it's sent to 2 ports. So there is a change in the IP tables. And if you take, for instance, an Istio proxy, a current one, a 1.3 Istio proxy, and you try to run it with some older control plane,
it will work. It will work very well, because we detect, we tell when we connect, we report what the...
Okay.
Absolutely.
So there won't be like implications for upgrade?
No implication. I mean, we are required to support upgrade as before.
Okay.
No, I think, Costin, we will support old proxies, 1.2 proxies with the new pilot, but we will not support 1.3 proxies with the 1.2 pilot. And we've never claimed to support that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's what Andre was referring to, though.
Exactly. Has the upgrade then been tested? Because I'm not sure what's the order of upgrade. Is it like first the pilot or the proxy?
Yeah, always the control plane, then the proxy.
Okay.
That may affect the downgrade, actually, because you have the requirement to be able to upgrade and also downgrade. We need to think about it.
The downgrade has to happen in the other direction, right?
Yeah.
Yes, actually, you're right. The downgrade is in the other direction.
Yeah. So I think, as long as we follow that, we're fine.
Oh, just one quick note about container port elimination. There is still a requirement to use container port if you're using named ports, because there is no way to avoid them. Just for reference.
What do you mean? We always have to use named ports. Like this?
No, name ports meaning if you have a port, a service with port 8080 mapped to port HTTP, instead of putting the port number in the service, the container is the one that is actually giving the actual port number. It's a complicated thing.
That's a Kubernetes requirement, though. So
yeah, it's a Kubernetes requirement.
Yeah, we're not adding any new requirement on top of that.
But we don't want people to just remove the container port and blindly and break stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, if your application has a container port, you don't have to remove that. Just for the new deployment, you may not have to write container port.
Yeah.
So just coming back to Sergey's question, we are confident that there are no implications on CNI.
So yeah, I have a question on that. So we in the CNI we use the Istio IP tables SH, and we basically have just a few diffs that we have to merge in because of the behavior. So as long as the changes that were required went into that, then we should inherit them.
Yep.
And we're also working on a longer term plan to just combine all of the what's used in Istio init with the same exact IP tables programming logic. So I think from Istio, we're going to try to merge those two together somehow, but that's still being worked on.
Tim, my question was, because maybe I misunderstood, but I thought that the annotation will identify which ports to include or to exclude, and the annotation of the application pod. Is it the case or no?
Well, they're saying that what the change with this change, that annotation isn't necessarily going to be required to be filled in anymore, and that.
But if there is annotation saying exclude port blah on the application port, I mean, in the case of the CNI, it will not work because the CNI programs at the startup time, and then, I mean, are you?
Sergey, I think I understand what you're saying. My understanding was that CNI is also looking up in Kubernetes the pod and is respecting the annotations on the pod, because otherwise a lot of other features that we have would not work. We have a lot of annotations that control exclude, include, IP ranges, and all kind of other stuff, which are all coming from the pod.
Yeah, I think the sequencing is that the admission controller that inserts is the thing that inserts that annotation before the pod spec is actually scheduled. So that annotation is present for both CNI and this NSM and NIT. I mean, Istio and NIT scenario. It's the same. It's the parameters are going to be exactly the same.
Okay. Cool.
And the CNI plugin has access to the pods. That's what I mean. And we probably should confirm this.
Yeah, I mean the CNI definitely is using the annotations from the pod spec. So.
If you have the concern that CNI might be break by this, how could we verify that?
By testing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind job that I think John converted to make to always run the CNI later Istio.
Yeah, we test with CNI, so.
But I don't think we test all the exclude ports, include ports, and all the other combinations. So probably we need to add, at least in the stability cluster, some more coverage.
Yeah, that would be a good.
Yeah. So actually, I'm for our benchmark tests, exclude inbound ports is required, which I'm just submitting the PR. But yeah, otherwise our benchmarks will just stop working, like right away. So I think they're already broken.
That means they're doing their job or task catching problems.
So who can take an action to test the CNI? Is it like you, Chen, or is it you, Tim, or Sergey? I think John is saying something that he added tests for the include and the exclude ports, but I'm not sure if that is John in combination with this filter migration.
Can someone at least do a manual testing on Tuesday for that? At least.
So did Mando?
You know a lot about the CNI.
Testing CNI. I'm not testing all the combinations.
Yeah. Let's take
if
this.
If you want, we sit together on Tuesday and we'll cover more stuff.
Yeah,
we can do that. But
yeah, I just don't know how.
Oh, I'll help you with that. Set it up. I'll help you. That's the issue.
Okay,
I'll help you with that.
That should be covered by the testing of CNI, because if CNI, whatever testing we're doing for CNI would break or not break.
Okay, so Roman offered to help you, Chen, with that.
Yeah, right? we'll do that on Tuesday in community testing.
Yeah.
At least manual testing.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have more questions about this topic? Any other concerns?
Well, I would add that it will be very important for everyone involved in testing to pay close attention to startup of the pods and what happens when pods are restarted and security in particular, because we want to make sure we cover as much as possible in terms of corner cases.
All right, if we don't have anything, then we can go to the next topic. Thank you very much, Eugen. That was very informative. A very good change. It's an excellent feature that you added. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the second one, which is a GitHub issue around limitations related to TCP services that make Istio pretty unusable on larger multi-tenant clusters. And here I hope like Shriram and Kostin will pitch in, because I saw you added comments recently, like as recently as last night or yesterday. So
well, that's something we had this issue since the beginning of Istio, how we handle stateful sets, and the only solution we have today is the fact that we require unique port for headless services. And I think the discussion in the bug is pretty clear.
So
yeah, I think there was, a temporary solution or a solution that might satisfy. The most common case was to generate an IP port listener for every pod in the headless service, if the headless service has less than like 5 or 6 pods. And in that scenario, then you can have any number of headless services on the on the same port in the same namespace and whatnot. And since most users tend not to have like hundreds of pods for their headless services like Postgres, etcd, and so on, this is sort of a minor optimization / a hack which will just work for them and remove the adoption burden / the user UX and improve the UX experience. But the only thing is that yes, if they have more than, let's say, like some threshold number of pods, let's say if they have more than like 6-7 pods, then we fall back to the existing behavior, which is that if there's a port conflict, we only pick the most earliest service, and then we log the rest as a port conflict. And if there's,
which will mean their stuff will be broken as soon as they add the 6th pod for
yes, but that will be, but it's a trade-off between like the stuff being broken on day one versus being broken on this. I can see the trade-offs on both sides. It's like we can definitely either log warnings, which is saying that like this headless service has less than 5 pods, so we are like doing this temporary thing, but please do make sure to make sure that headless services are on unique ports. If not, bad stuff will happen. We can log those warnings in pilot and or add a metric that people can actually see, saying that like, okay, this metric is actually increasing, which means I have to pay attention to this and make sure I don't.
But Shriram, I don't think there is any problem to have all IPs. It doesn't matter how many you have, just send them. If we can restrict it to only the workloads that actually need this information, those that import, I put a comment that the scalability issue of sending everywhere is clearly a problem. But if we restrict it only to the services that explicitly import headless services with conflicting ports and nothing else, I think we'll be quite fine to send even 100 or 1,000 IPs.
No, but I think that there are other problems as well, right? Because it's like if we create a headless service, the listener on wildcard listener 0.0.0, and we have the cluster set to a pass-through listener, which means if that headless service happens to listen on port 443, then you effectively end up sending traffic to like the entire any arbitrary service on 443, because it'll just end up in a pass-through cluster. And that's an example. But if you just create any 3306 headless service, and if there happen to be other headless services in different places, it'll just go in, but then we'll end up recording metrics as though it went to one specific service, right?
But we wouldn't do that. We would, if you explicitly import a service on port 443, a headless, for that service will not generate a 0.0.0. Instead, we'll generate all the IPs and keep them up to date. But only for the people who explicitly import that service. That's the key here. Otherwise, we'll crash and burn.
So can I check a bit my understanding? So originally we had just 000 because we couldn't scale to use this like IP port option. Right now we are sort of in between. Like for some services we use 000, for others we use the IP port.
No. We are for headless service we only use 000. The change that Shriram mentioned was dropped. It was a proposal.
Okay, but like I think we discussed in the past about like making that change using the pod IP, and the main limitation was the scale, right? So if
Yes.
we combine this with the sidecar, just as you suggest, costing, we could reduce the scale.
Yep.
Right, and make it work. Like we will probably need to measure to see the point of breakage, but we have a good way of solving the problem, except that we're hitting some scale issues. Right?
If we limit it to only the workloads that are directly affected, I don't think it's any scale issue, because there will be probably a small number of pods that need all those hundreds of IPs, and they will pay the price for the features they use. I mean, it's not really something that every pod in the entire network will have to bear.
Right.
But that's anyway we generated that way. We always generate the listeners based on like whatever is being imported, right? We're not generating it for everybody. I mean, unless otherwise if somebody does not set a sidecar, then they already have the performance penalties that they pay. But if somebody sets the sidecar, then they already get that feature.
I understand. No. What I mean to go even further than that and say that only if you import two headless services with a same port. I mean, if you import one headless service, you get the normal configuration. If you import two headless services on the same port, that's when you trigger the explicit IP.
Right, but I'm saying that even in that case, like if you just only resolve the conflict, there are other side effects, which is that once you import one headless service on 3306, and if your application and whether or not you use a sidecar, if your application happens to talk to another headless service on a different namespace, right, on same port 3306, then this application is going to be like, traffic will go, but the MTLS will actually break, because the calling side is actually expecting the service account to match with the headless service in the local namespace and not the headless service in the remote namespace. And this is why people's headless service MTLS thing keeps breaking, because we use the pass-through clusters for.
Yeah, but they will not use a pass-through. That's the point. I mean, they will use explicitly. They will get a list of a listener for each pod IP that is running the service. So they will never hit this situation where they fall through the pass-through. So if you explicitly import the two services from different namespaces or whatever, you will always get the full list of IPs and the proper configuration for each of them.
Yes. So then what is the difference between doing this for whether or not you have sidecar and just doing it by default?
I think you should do it by default, because people also use the auto scaling feature for pods, right? So they will
but not for headless services. Not for headless services typically tend to be stateful sets, which have yes, but I mean the common case is what I'm trying to tackle, and not the more common case. That's why I said, like, if they want you to do auto scaling, and if your things is going beyond 5 or whatever it is, we go back to the older behavior, which is going to be an issue. But for people, we just postpone the issue.
So basically, you'll have a crash, because then suddenly, as soon as you scale to 6, some workloads will crash and no longer work, because you'll have a conflict.
Yeah, I'm definitely concerned about us just flip-flopping our strategy here. So whatever we do, I think it should be consistent. Yeah. But I would be fine with just saying we always send all the IP addresses, and then maybe provide an annotation to opt out. If you have a service that you know is going to have a lot of replicas or scale a lot, you can just opt out of this feature, perhaps.
Just the problem is that many people don't use imports and isolation, and we already have problems.
Which is fine, right? Because here's the thing: that many people don't use imports, and many people also don't have this like large set of headless service pods, and they typically tend to have like 1 or 2 headless services in a cluster, the MySQL database or a PostgreSQL database here and there. And so usually 1 or 2, it's not that much. And to the extent that we would be able to like handle this normal UX case for like at least 80% population, and those that actually cannot, as Howard said, they can actually go on and flip on this flag that basically says, like, you know what, I'll just stick with I'll start using the sidecars to constrain it, and I'll like, and also make sure that, like, as Howard says, the annotations and so on and so forth, which can help them. In other words, it satisfies 80%, and the 20% will probably have to do additional work. But today it's like nobody's happy.
But yeah, preferable to do the additional work when you need it, but have a deterministic behavior that
I agree, and I agree with that. So maybe then we can just send all the listeners, but then it's a question of should it be default and we can just do it whether or not you have a sidecar, or should we just simply tell people that you have to start using sidecar? In which case, then
oh, you mean the sidecar with capital S?
Yes, sidecar capitalist. And so if they have to sidecar CRD, if they have to use a sidecar CRD to get this benefit, then it's already yet another step in order to get the out of the box Istio working, because then they would be like, oops,
we can have an option, a global option. I mean, if people have a very small deployment, as you said, then it's not a problem. Scalability is not a problem, but somehow we need to deal with large clusters. And for large clusters,
I agree. So I think we should just have an option to disable this thing and go back to the older behavior for people who are doing the larger clusters.
But instead of going back to the older behavior, we should actually document the fact that they could use the sidecar API.
Yes.
Help with their scale, because that's what we're going towards, right? That one is also good for like enforcing policies and other use cases. So if it's really like a big deployment, it's more beneficial to use the sidecar.
Yeah, they have to.
We're going to change the listener to some, some people don't need to understand how we configure Envoy, but we configure with one listener or 10. Like that's very implementation detail, right? But we're permeating at the user level.
But one thing is clear: we can, for small scale deployment, I have no problem to turn this feature on by default. I mean, to generate the full list of IPs. The issue is what we do when we have a large deployment, and that's where the scalability really comes into play.
Yeah.
And there, anyway, you have to use a sidecar with capital S, because otherwise you will be screwed. So let's.
And so in that case, this issue will again won't go away, because in that case, it's like only within your local namespace, you just have like the listeners for every. So in that case, so we should be having this feature on by default and just have a flag to turn it off. And people who have the larger scale, since they use sidecar, their blast radius will automatically be smaller. And within the namespace, they'll just simply have a few more listeners for the headless services compared to just a 0.0. But it's better because we don't have wildcard listeners anymore.
But to be clear, not for all headless service, only for headless service where we detect a conflict, a port conflict.
I think the port is very complicated because people suddenly need to track like how they support everything.
Yeah, but again, scalability. Mandar is in the meeting. Maybe he can probably argue about this instead of me.
Also, I think one of the complaints in the issue was about this enforcement for ports, that we require every TCP to have a different port.
Right, and so that's the point, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, if you only do this only when you have conflicts, then you can go back to the flip-flop behavior. If you don't have a conflict, you have 0.0.0, and the moment you have a conflict, you again flip to all actual listeners, and then it goes back and forth. Like, remember, 2 years ago, Stoner had the issue. Like 1 year and a half year ago, like one namespace had Prometheus, another namespace also launched a Prometheus, and things broke, and and then things would just flip flop back and forth because.
But they'll not break. They'll flip flop, but in both cases they'll work.
No. Only one of them work, other did not work.
No. If we do what we discussed here, I mean, if we generate full list of IPs, if there is a conflict, as soon as there is a conflict, everything will keep working, just slightly different.
But in that case, the MTLS will still break because
it will still work because you generate a full list of IPs. So there is no case where it will be broken. If you have a conflict, you will get a full list of IPs for everyone. If you don't have conflict, we generate a 0.0 and it works.
No. I mean, why do you need to generate it only for clean conflict? Let's generate it in all cases.
Because the scalability will be very bad, and people are complaining also about the fact that the pilot is crash looping.
Right, but remember the scalability thing, once again, if it's a large scale scenario where people actually automatically configure the sidecar, then they will only have one headless service and it will not be that many. And when they have that one headless service, and if they find that their headless service has like 500 ports, they can have a flag to turn this feature off and go back to wildcard listener. And like if they only have like five pods in the headless service because it's just standard HCD cluster, then they this is almost not that much of overhead because it's just.
I guess we can settle this with data, because I think the performance and scalability will need to run some tests, because again, we are talking about every time a pod is restarted, we'll do a full LDS push with all the listeners to a lot of clusters. So the problem is that with
every time a headless pod is restarted.
Yeah, every time a headless pod is restarted.
Those are not restarted so often, right? Those are generally like SQL database.
Sure, but
they are
but
very much up.
stateful sets, right?
yeah, but
so
when they start to be restarted, you bring down the entire mesh, because you will start having, there are crash loops. You have tests where what happens.
But remember, so again, the argument here is if you have that bring down the entire mesh thing, then people will start using a sidecar, and or if it's a large scale issue, then they would have already been using a sidecar, such that this pod reset will only affect things in that namespace and not everybody else.
Again, I'll let the performance security team to decide if this can be turned on for everything. I'm not entirely sure what happens. I mean, in the normal ideal case, everything is fine. Small clusters or clusters, everything is stable. The problem is we don't have enough testing and for the cases where something flip-flops because there is a bug, and then this escalates and starts bringing down far more than it should. But again, Mandar should comment and decide.
So, sure. So you have a PR that does basically this just with a limit of 5, right?
Yeah, I can.
Why don't we just remove the limit of 5 and test it out?
Yeah, and then we can set up something larger.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say if it's going to have a big performance impact or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Certainly might, but.
And we talked about scale, but for me, it's not clear what is the scale, what is the breaking point.
It's the disruption, really. I mean, I think
it's a fact of when so right now if a pod is flip-flopping, and we are starting to add more and more tests for pod flip-flopping, we just do an EDS push, an incremental EDS push and that's it. In the new world, we'll have to do a full LDS, XDS, the entire thing pushed to all the workloads.
So right now we cannot push incremental LDS, even
there
like
is no such thing.
Chain, right?
Yeah, no, nothing. It's we everything except for endpoints is extremely expensive and results in the recomputation.
But I mean, yeah, we have to push it, but I don't think Anwar is going to reload any listener except for the pods IP one, because others
it's
are
a pilot I'm worried about. It's a pilot I'm worried about, not
yeah, and it is only in this scenario that, like, I guess it's, if this is going to be a problem even in a smaller cluster, then yes. But the point here is that, like, when somebody complains of that, we should probably go and tell them that, look, you should have the sidecar enabled so that you reduce the blast radius only to the namespaces that are consuming their headless service and not to everybody else. Because that's a nice segue to tell people that, look, this is a scalable issue, you should start using this. And whatever default sidecar, so on and so forth. In a larger scale cluster, they would have already had the sidecar that this flip-flop thing will only happen, not flip-flop, the listener pushes and so on will only happen for that specific namespace and not for everybody else. But I agree that the data needs to be presented to actually make the proper decision on what the default should be. But
John, do you had some code to so if we do a push, can we filter to only the affected workloads? Because the problem is that my understanding is that when we do an LDS push or a full push, it goes to everyone no matter what. So sidecar doesn't really have an impact.
No. Sidecar does work, right? I mean, if you have sidecar is present only, then we push the things to that workload, right?
No.
And that's the point of sidecar. No, sidecar in terms of, like, I'm
talking implementation, not ideal world.
Yeah. So we've recently added filtering for just the endpoints. So an endpoint update will only push to the sidecars that import it, but if you did a config change, it will push to everything no matter what.
Even though it's the same configuration.
Yeah, we don't.
Right, I think I had a PR for that as well, which reused the earlier push context and then, like, basically just simply like pre-computed values for a bunch of those things. And we could actually optimize that as well, right? If we start storing the CDS output and other things in that sidecar itself, then we should probably be able to, like, reuse that thing as well.
Yeah, I think it's possible, but we don't currently do it. So
I know.
It definitely is something we should do and is possible, I think. So.
But with what we have today, I mean, with the existing configuration, I think restricting it is probably the safest bet, and we should try it. But I'm happy to try the simple solution first and see how it's performed. But we absolutely need to scale test it, otherwise.
Yeah, my main concern is if you have some headless service with, say, 10 replicas and they all start crash looping, and now Pilot's just sending crazy amounts of full pushes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Only one is enough to crash push, and again, this is not something we typically cover in our tests.
Yeah, because even someone had a case where they had just one pod, one replica, and it was crash looping, triggering full pushes, and it completely destroyed their whole cluster. So this is kind of that amplified.
But I think that's already a problem, right? If we're not support this, I don't think we should.
It's not a problem because, again, that's why we have the incremental EDS. So incremental EDS is intended to alleviate this problem. So flip-flopping pod is not causing a full push.
Right. Right, but still, like, so we need to actually measure with Shriram fix instead of just making assumptions, and and so the question here, how do we proceed? Like, let's say Shriram, like, for instance, who would be able to test this?
I can push the PR, clean up the PR, and remove the limits and push it, but I don't have a large cluster that Mandar is running to test it actually.
I could test it as well.
John, you could test this with Shriram's PR.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But we need to make sure we have the flip-flopping test before. I think we have the readiness failing test. But
No, we could do it by simulated, right? We can just simply go and
yeah, I'll just do it manually. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, and I think like maybe we shouldn't worry about any scale. We should worry about the scale. So of the the Carlson or from AutoTrader opened this issue. So I think we can just ask him about his scale. It's probably in the hundreds of services.
I think we need to worry about scale always, because that's why we have scalability problem, because we don't worry about scaling before implementing features.
Right, but like we can benchmark this particular case. There are actually 20 more thumbs up, so it's likely a lot of other
PR on the issue.
On the issue,
yeah, but
so it's likely there are like 20 other people or customer who would like to fix. That's a hot.
But thumbs up don't help scalability. I mean, it's
Yeah, if we restore their clusters, there'll be 20 thumbs down. So
yeah,
you need to make sure it's scalable.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna ask them to tell us their scalability number. Okay. So that will be number of services and number of pods for the headless services.
But that's not the problem. The problem is not those 20 people. It's the people who have 2,000 or 3,000 pods and don't necessarily have this problem. That will also be affected by this, because they will certainly pay the price even if they manage to have different ports and don't run.
No, but that's why we'll have a feature to disable that.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just remember the n square problem, so that's why I'm saying that we always should.
I agree. You should just, I mean, it goes both ways. Remember that, like, the moment you create a wildcard thing, and with a pass-through cluster, that means that you will just simply allow any traffic on that port to go to this destination. And the moment you add MTLS on that particular listener, then it's like, it actually breaks the existing traffic, because that traffic is going to something out of cluster will break, and or if that traffic goes to a different namespace, that'll again break because we don't do the MTLS check, and that is actually broken even today.
Yep.
And that's so that the goal of this thing was to actually resolve that, because almost I mean, even after us fixing the MTLS thing for a normal headless service, this thing kept coming up saying people said headless service is not working with TLS and so on and so forth. Cassandra doesn't work, or Elasticsearch does not work. If you see, like, there was some issue that I think Ed curated list of things where almost all of them were actually headless services. Like, I think if Ed was there, he could probably point out, like, there's like about 15 different or 6-7 different applications that don't work, of which like, it was Elasticsearch, Cassandra, MySQL.
With strict mode. With strict mode, with permissive mode even? I think most of them work now with permissive.
No, MySQL and so on. I mean, we added this thing, but I think it's not just a strict and permissive mode thing. It was.
All right.
It's more from mutual tier strict mode, right?
Sorry, Dean, can you repeat?
So MySQL doesn't work in permissive mode, and I don't know why.
It won't. It should work in 1.3. It should work in 1.3. It won't work in 1.2, but it should work in 1.3. We added a feature to fall. It'll time out and it'll start working within 10 milliseconds. So it should work in 1.3.
So Ed, since you claim that this doesn't work and you probably want to verify that it works, could you actually add it to the 1.3 testing spreadsheet if it's not there? Because I don't even know if we have a task for that.
Yeah, we have somebody dedicated assigned to cross through each of these applications.
Because like if it works now, we can. So okay, one second there. So if this works, we suddenly have one more use case that is supported, right? So it would be great to validate it.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mandar, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just saying that I think that feature has an E2E test that sets it up in permissive with MySQL, right? Yeah. So it's
Yes.
it is going to work.
Yeah, so this issue ad you opened 14743, I thought it's only for strict mutual TLS. Permissive should all be working. Is that, could you maybe clarify that
Look,
issue in the
permissive
issue?
does not work with MySQL and some other protocols today because there is a problem in the TLS sniffing code, which we fixed in 1.3, such that TLS sniffing code will work even with MySQL and other protocols.
It's a promise of the protocols where the client speaks first. I mean, it's okay if the,
server speaks first.
Sorry, if the server speaks first. Yeah, sorry, the other way around. SMTP, MySQL, and some other protocols.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, everyone is confused about this.
Yes, it's so confusing.
Okay, so I think we got some, good perspective and follow up on this issue. So John will test with Shriram's PR, and we can understand the breaking point. And then based on the breaking point, we will see if we can actually enable the pod IP listeners for everybody, right? So we will likely need to discuss more in the next meeting in 2 weeks. I'm not sure, John, when you will get to test this, but it would be good if it's in somewhere in the next 2 weeks or the next month.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We have a follow up.
Yeah.
All right.
And probably we should make sure the test includes RBAC and all the other features because to make sure we test. Because RBAC is the one that is, it's had a lot of stuff for each listener. We are going to generate far more listeners than before, and that's a kind of conflict.
Well, this is targeted for 1.4, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got time.
Frankly, if we can get it to work without the RBAC complication, we can do some RBAC add-on later.
No, right? I mean this is actually, that's how we verify that it doesn't have an impact and doesn't break existing, because that's what is creating the conflict.
This is all on outbound, not on inbound, right? So RBAC doesn't really do.
Oh yeah, you're right. No, it was an example. I mean, all the stuff that we typically add in, because you have a lot of features. So if people start turn on if we test with no feature enabled, everything is perfectly fine. If we start enabling features, that's when it breaks, and we don't know if customers use or don't use those features.
So what would be this, just the telemetry, right?
Telemetry probably is a good example, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, telemetry and MTLS.
Yeah.
Other tabs won't have many more filters or other.
A traffic split or some other stuff that is typically added, because if it's just an empty config, it's a different result than if we have a realistic config. And that's what we want to make sure, that a realistic cluster is not going to break under load and explode.
Yeah, and with this, maybe we need to push Envoy towards incremental LDS and other goodies, because that's what's causing the problem. The fact that we cannot download a single listener with its routes and clusters and endpoints without doing a full push, right?
That's what UChann's working on, though, right? Filter chain discovery.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I'm still expecting filter chain will be sent as a whole. Not incremental.
Oh, not incremental. I see.
And for the virtual host discovery service, which we started about 6 months ago, we are still stuck in review, so don't hold your breath for.
So what is this costing? Can you talk about it?
The on demand just for virtual hosts, which is another.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
It's far more complicated than it sounds. That's my point.
So that's in progress. Okay.
It's been in progress for 6 or 9 months.
But would that help? Because I don't think that will help in this case.
Not in this case,
Not
but
in this
in other cases. But that's kind of the simpler problem that we still haven't solved. I mean, how to deal with just virtual hosts. It will happen, but...
Okay. All right. So we have 4 more minutes. Anything more on this? Okay, no. So if not, I have an announcement to make. So it will be probably more official coming from the TOC. So there's been a decision in the TOC to create more focused working groups. And for instance, there will be a data plane working group for networking, which will be very focused like on Envoy in particular and everything that's data plane. So we will have to see exactly when the meetings take place. Probably it's going to be like alternate week with this networking working group. So this meeting will stay focused on pilot and control plane behavior, and we'll try to get more coverage for Envoy specifics in the data plane working group. Also, the environments is going with 2 separate tracks. So there is 1 week there'll be discussion focused around the installer and everything like that. And alternate weeks, there are discussions around multi-cluster. So we will try to send all the topics that are related to multi-cluster to that meeting as well. But of course, feel free to bring stuff here as well. And so that means there are more meetings for people to attend, but also there is like more time to discuss everything that's needed. So I hope that works for everybody. So then stay tuned for the meeting invites and do attend those, please. And let's do again, cross. I'll try to attend as many as I can, but sometimes it's good, if leads from one group come and, bring awareness to other groups as well. That helps. Okay. Any questions?
Is there anything networking that we're locked on for the 1.3 release, or did we pretty much merge everything in we need?
There are a few Envoy filter PRs that cherry pick issues were there. There was also this Doug's PR on the metadata thing, that node metadata thing. I don't know if it just got closed. I don't think it got merged. Doug made a huge PR. Yeah, that changed.
That didn't get merged.
That one did get merged.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say I have a PR that depends on that one, so
we have client side telemetry depending on that. So
okay, yeah,
other proxy side telemetry, so that got merged.
Cool. Yeah, and then I have that one for the RBAC filter that Sherwin Costin reviewed. So
yeah, we will cut RC1 around late morning tomorrow Pacific time. We got PRs.
Is that the last planned RC?
Yeah.
Okay.
RC1, right, or RC?
RC1, yeah.
Yeah. So there are 9 open cherry pick PRs on release 1.3. There was
nothing waiting for review. There's only one waiting for review. So I don't know.
No, so there's a rate limiting fix, and all of them are approved. I guess it's just stuck. I guess.
Oh, they may just be stuck on tests or something. Yeah.
There's one Envoy filter PR that just says changes requested. I guess it was because the conflicts have automatically been resolved. Oh, that's nice. And Romain, if you could remove that block, then that thing will also probably go in.
On what?
I think 16413.
Yeah, you may want to change your
Istio. But
yeah, Istio, yes, 16413. Some tests are failing, but I should just see what they are about. And the CLA board is on anyway. It's all stuck on all of them, so it's.
Yeah, you may want to change your query to not just requiring approval, and so you can push the tests along if they're broken or other things. Because yeah, there's a lot of stuff that looks like it's just broken on tests. Also means we should make our test list leaky.
I don't know if I should just do any merge with the latest release branch or just simply, well, I guess I just try a retest again as such.
There are a couple of more PRs coming today, probably to fix some more things. So.
Oh yeah, I should do the galley validation thing, which also needs to be. Yes.
Is that galley validation in 1.3 or pending?
No, it was always invoking the validation code, and it was just hanging there, even if we just run it without something. And so if people who are disabled galley validation, the whole thing would just break. So I had fixed that thing.
No,
yeah, I think we need to. I don't think anyone cherry picked that though. So someone may need to add that label.
I'll cherry pick that.
That's a good one, yeah.
Okay,
Oh, and
for
also there was one more. Oh, I had
Go
a
ahead.
PR for not modifying filter change in place because that was causing data corruption issues. And I don't know if that was. Oh, because of the bot failed. It said it cannot apply this PR because of merge conflict things.
Oh yeah, sometimes you have to do it yourself.
Okay, I'll just send those things.
Okay.
Okay, anything more to discuss? Because we're out of time. No? All right. Thank you very much for attending and participating, and see you in 2 weeks. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
See you.